My fiancé cancelled our wedding to marry my best friend, then demanded I pay for the honeymoon they're going on together. When I refused, they exposed my personal secrets on social media. My name is Dylan 30M, and I thought I was about to marry the love of my life, Rachel 28F. We'd been together for 5 years, and our relationship felt like something out of a storybook. She was beautiful, driven, and made me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. I'd known my best friend, Josh, 31M, since college. We'd been through thick and thin together, supporting each other through breakups, career changes, and every imaginable struggle. I never could have predicted that these two people, the ones closest to my heart, would conspire to tear my life apart. It all started about 2 weeks before the wedding. Rachel was acting distant, and I chalked it up to pre-wedding jitters. Planning had been stressful, and I figured she was just overwhelmed. One night, while she was out, I decided to tidy up some loose ends for the wedding. I found her phone on the coffee table, buzzing with a message from Josh. I wasn't the type to snoop, but something in my gut told me to look. I wish I hadn't. The messages between them were unmistakably romantic. They had been exchanging intimate texts for weeks, maybe longer. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My fiancé and my best friend were talking about starting fresh, about how hard it was to lie to me, about how they'd finally be together soon. The words blurred before my eyes as my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. When Rachel came home that night, I confronted her. She didn't deny it. Instead, she looked me in the eye and said, "Dylan, I'm sorry. I thought I loved you, but I realized it's Josh I want to be with. I'm calling off the wedding." Her words were cold, emotionless, like she'd rehearsed them. I stared at her, speechless, as she packed a bag and walked out the door. In a daze, I called Josh, hoping there was some kind of explanation, some misunderstanding. But he didn't even answer. I watched as their social media statuses changed to "in a relationship" within hours. It was like a public announcement, a blatant slap in the face, confirming what I'd just been told. The woman I was supposed to marry, the man I considered a brother, both gone together without a hint of remorse. The next few days were a blur of numbness and disbelief. I cancelled the wedding venue, called off the catering, and reached out to guests, choking on the words as I explained why there would be no celebration. As if that wasn't humiliating enough, Rachel and Josh had the audacity to send me a bill for the honeymoon they were planning to take together. Yes, you read that right. They wanted me to pay for their romantic getaway. I threw the bill in the trash and didn't respond. I wasn't going to entertain their insanity, not after everything they'd done. But apparently, that didn't sit well with them. A few days later, I started getting notifications on my phone. Friends reaching out, family calling, all asking about the same thing. Rachel and Josh had taken to social media, airing out my personal secrets. They didn't just stop at our breakup. They dug into every insecurity I'd ever confided, every personal struggle, and twisted it into a public spectacle. They revealed things I'd told them in confidence, details of my past relationships, embarrassing moments, and vulnerabilities I'd never wanted anyone else to know. They painted me as this clingy, controlling guy who drove Rachel away. The betrayal was overwhelming. I'd lost my fiancé, my best friend, and now they were dragging my name through the mud for everyone to see. After their public spectacle, my life felt like it was spiraling out of control. Everywhere I went, people looked at me with pity or judgment. I'd never felt so exposed, so humiliated. Rachel and Josh had taken my secrets, my most private thoughts, and turned them into fodder for gossip. Friends, family, even acquaintances reached out, some offering sympathy, others subtly probing for more dirt. It was like they had turned me into a character in their twisted story. I tried to do damage control, reaching out to close friends to explain my side, but it felt futile. The way Rachel and Josh framed everything made it seem like I was the bad guy, the one who'd forced them to find solace in each other. They spun the narrative so well that people who had known me for years began to question everything about me. I watched as people I trusted, people I'd thought would stand by me, took their side or simply faded away, not wanting to get involved. One evening, I was sitting alone, nursing a drink, when I got a message from a mutual friend. It was a screenshot of a new post from Rachel and Josh. They were announcing their engagement. It hadn't even been a month since she'd walked out on our wedding plans. My stomach twisted as I read the message beneath the post. They thanked their supportive friends for helping them see the truth, and Rachel even wrote that she had never felt this loved or free in her life. As if it couldn't get any worse, they mentioned me by name, saying that the time they spent with me had made them realize how much they belonged together. They painted our entire relationship as a mistake, something she'd been forced to go through to find her true love with Josh. I felt like I was going to be sick. They were turning my entire life, my love, into some kind of stepping stone for their happiness, and they were reveling in it. The next few days, I went dark on social media. I deleted my accounts, blocked them, and tried to distance myself from the mess they were making of my life. But even offline, I couldn't escape the whispers, the stares. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, constantly on edge, waiting for the next bomb they'd drop on my reputation. I barely slept, haunted by memories of Rachel's betrayal and Josh's smug face. I couldn't shake the feeling of complete and utter helplessness, trapped by their lies. Then, as if I hadn't been through enough, I received a call from my employer. They'd heard the rumors, seen the posts, and were worried about the image I was projecting. They said my drama was reflecting poorly on the company and suggested that I take an extended leave. Just like that, my career was in jeopardy, all because of Rachel and Josh's sick need for attention and validation. I was furious, but what could I do? They'd already taken so much from me, and now it felt like they were coming after everything else too. In a desperate attempt to regain some control, I reached out to a lawyer, hoping to find a way to make them stop. I didn't care about getting back at them. I just wanted my life back. But the lawyer told me it would be difficult to take legal action, since they hadn't technically broken any laws. I was devastated, left with no real recourse, no way to fight back. I was at their mercy, watching as they continued to twist the knife. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I discovered that Josh had started contacting some of my former colleagues, spreading more lies about me. He claimed that I'd been unhinged since the breakup, that I'd made threats against him and Rachel, all fabricated nonsense designed to make me look like a dangerous, unstable man. I could see the impact it was having as I started getting emails from clients and colleagues who were now concerned about my behavior. My professional reputation was in shambles, all because of their relentless campaign to destroy me. I felt completely cornered, with no one to turn to. The people who mattered to me were drifting away, and my career was hanging by a thread, all because two people I trusted more than anything had decided I was disposable, that my pain was just part of their love story. I realized then that I couldn't just sit by and let them walk all over me. They'd taken everything from me, and if I didn't stand up for myself, they'd leave me with nothing. At that moment, something shifted inside me. The helplessness began to harden into resolve. I wasn't going to let them win. I didn't know exactly how I'd fight back, but I knew I wasn't going to let them destroy me. They thought they could ruin my life and get away with it, but they had no idea what I was capable of. They'd unleashed something in me, and I was ready to make them regret it. With my resolve firmly in place, I knew I needed a plan. Rachel and Josh had blindsided me, but I wasn't about to let them steamroll over my entire life without consequence. They'd invaded every part of my personal world, so I decided to dig into theirs. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd be ready to show them just how ruthless I could be. The first thing I did was gather all the evidence of their online smear campaign. I went through every post, every comment, and screenshot everything. I documented the messages they'd sent to mutual friends and colleagues, twisting the story to suit their narrative. It was tedious, but I knew that if I wanted to make a case against them, I needed every piece of evidence I could get my hands on. They framed me as some sort of deranged, heartbroken ex, but I'd show them who the real manipulative ones were. I also decided to go on the offensive. I reached out to a few mutual friends who hadn't bought into their lies, friends who knew me well enough to see through their smear campaign. They were as shocked as I'd been, and more than willing to help me set the record straight. Together, we began to plant seeds of doubt among our social circles, exposing Rachel and Josh's twisted actions without even mentioning them directly. The goal wasn't to sink to their level, but to remind people that there were two sides to every story. Then I stumbled upon something I hadn't expected, a rumor about Josh that had been circulating for years. Apparently, he pulled similar stunts with other friends in the past, manipulating, lying, and using people to get what he wanted. I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it sooner, but in hindsight it made sense. Josh had always been the charming, magnetic guy everyone gravitated toward. He had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room, but as soon as he didn't need you anymore, he'd drop you without a second thought. Armed with this new information, I started reaching out to his former friends, people who had been burned by Josh in the past. I listened to their stories, shared my own, and found a strange sense of camaraderie in our shared experiences. It was cathartic, bonding over the betrayal we'd all felt at his hands. Together, we decided to put together a dossier of sorts, a collection of testimonials, messages, and anecdotes that painted a clear picture of who Josh really was. As for Rachel, I discovered that she wasn't as squeaky clean as she liked people to believe. I came across evidence that she had been involved in several online relationships while we were together, each one as emotionally manipulative as the next. She'd spun these tales of being a devoted fiancée, but the reality was far from it. She had a pattern of using people for validation, discarding them when they were no longer useful to her. Fueled by anger and a sense of purpose, I started releasing bits and pieces of what I'd uncovered. I didn't do it publicly. That wasn't my style. Instead, I subtly leaked information to a few select friends, trusting them to pass it on. I knew that gossip spreads like wildfire, and in no time, people started questioning the saintly image Rachel and Josh had built for themselves. I could see the cracks forming in their facade, and I relished every moment of it. Then came the turning point. Rachel and Josh had scheduled a huge engagement party, determined to flaunt their relationship in front of everyone they knew. It was to be a grand spectacle, a celebration of their true love after all the hardship they'd endured. They'd invited everyone, friends, family, co-workers, and I knew this would be the perfect opportunity to expose them once and for all. I attended the party under the guise of civility. They hadn't expected me to show up, and when I walked in, I could see the shock on their faces. Josh tried to play it cool, welcoming me with that fake smile of his, while Rachel shot me a wary glance, clearly uncomfortable. I could feel the tension in the room, the curious eyes on me as people whispered among themselves. When it was time for the speeches, Josh stood up, holding Rachel's hand, and launched into a saccharine monologue about how they'd found each other through adversity. He painted me as a villain without ever saying my name, describing how they'd been brave enough to stand up against those who didn't understand their love. It was nauseating listening to him twist the story to suit his narrative. But I let him talk, biding my time. Finally, it was my turn. I stood up, holding a drink, and congratulated them, keeping my tone as cordial as I could manage. I mentioned how lucky they were to have each other and hinted that I hoped they wouldn't repeat past mistakes. The room went silent, people exchanging glances, sensing the tension. And that's when I dropped the bombshell. I revealed everything I'd discovered about them, the online relationships, the manipulative behavior, the lies they'd spread about me. I didn't hold back. I spoke calmly, clearly, addressing everyone in the room. I didn't yell, didn't rant. I simply laid out the facts, one by one, watching as the color drained from Rachel's face and Josh's smug expression faltered. By the time I was done, the room was buzzing with whispers. Rachel looked like she was about to faint, while Josh's face twisted in anger. I gave a slight nod and walked out, leaving them to deal with the fallout. As I left, I felt a sense of satisfaction wash over me. I'd taken back control, exposed them for who they really were, and now they would have to face the consequences of their actions. After the engagement party, the fallout was swift and merciless. Word of my revelations spread like wildfire, not just among our mutual friends, but throughout the community. Rachel and Josh's carefully curated image began to unravel, and with it, the life they planned together. The days that followed were a whirlwind of phone calls, texts, and messages from friends and acquaintances, all of them expressing shock at what they'd learned. I found out that Rachel's family, who had always adored Josh, were livid. Her mother, a stern woman with a firm sense of right and wrong, had reportedly told Rachel that she was no daughter of hers if she continued with this farce of a relationship. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction, knowing that Rachel was finally facing the consequences of her betrayal. Josh wasn't faring much better. His employer had caught wind of the situation after a few of his colleagues who were at the party spread the word. They'd always been uneasy about his manipulative tendencies, but now they had concrete examples. I heard he was called into HR for a conversation about his conduct outside of work and was issued a formal warning. His carefully crafted reputation was crumbling, and I knew he wouldn't take it well. One evening, I got a call from an old friend, Julia, who'd always been close to both Josh and me. She'd been suspiciously quiet throughout this ordeal, and I had figured she'd chosen sides. But when she called, she sounded genuinely upset, asking me to meet her for coffee. I agreed, curious to hear what she had to say. When we met, Julia looked worn out, her usual confidence replaced with a nervous energy. She explained that Josh had been trying to reach out to everyone who had cut ties with him, spinning the situation as a misunderstanding and accusing me of trying to ruin his life. He'd gone on a tirade about how I'd made everything up, insisting that I was simply bitter and jealous. But Julia had known me long enough to sense the truth. I didn't believe him, she said, stirring her coffee absently. Honestly, I can't believe I didn't see through him before. He's not who I thought he was. Hearing that was a relief. One of the hardest parts of this ordeal had been the uncertainty, wondering if people would see through Josh's lies or if they'd side with him, buying into his charm. But Julia's words reassured me that I wasn't alone in this, that my friends weren't as blind as I'd feared. She even apologized for not reaching out sooner, admitting that she'd been struggling to process everything. As we talked, Julia revealed something that I hadn't expected. Apparently, Josh had a history of manipulation that stretched back years. She'd heard rumors that he'd done similar things in past relationships, using people for their resources and connections before discarding them. It was a pattern, a destructive toxic cycle that he'd honed over the years. Fueled by this new information, I decided to take things a step further. I started reaching out to some of his exes, using my network of friends to track down anyone who had crossed paths with Josh. What I uncovered was both shocking and validating. Each story was eerily similar. Josh would charm his way into their lives, make them feel special, then exploit their vulnerabilities until they were left questioning their own sanity. I compiled these stories, with the ex's permission, into a detailed dossier. I wanted to have it on hand, a comprehensive record of his behavior that I could use if needed. The goal wasn't revenge for revenge's sake, but to protect myself and others from any further harm. Josh had built his life on lies and manipulation, and it was time for the truth to come out. Meanwhile, Rachel's situation was spiraling out of control. The wedding had been called off, and her family was pressuring her to reevaluate her choices. She'd lost face, not only in front of her friends, but within her own family. I heard through mutual connections that she was devastated, unable to cope with the backlash. People who had once adored her were now turning their backs, shocked at the lengths she'd gone to deceive everyone. But just as I thought things were starting to settle down, Rachel and Josh struck back in a final desperate attempt to save face. They took to social media, posting long emotional statements about how I had misinterpreted everything, about how they'd never intended to hurt me, and how they wished I could let go of the past. It was infuriating to see them trying to control the narrative, painting themselves as victims and me as some unhinged ex-fiancé out for revenge. I knew I couldn't let this slide, so I posted my own response, including carefully chosen excerpts from the dossier I'd compiled with the permission of Josh's exes. I didn't name names, but I made it clear there was a long history of deception and betrayal. I laid out the facts, staying calm and measured, focusing on the truth and letting people make up their own minds. The response was overwhelming. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, offering their support and sharing similar stories of betrayal and manipulation from other toxic relationships. As the days passed, Rachel and Josh's influence faded. They tried to play the victim, to manipulate the people around them, but the truth had a way of shining through. They were exposed, their reputations tarnished, and their once grand social circle had shrunk to almost nothing. In their desperation, they'd only succeeded in isolating themselves further. Through it all, I found a new strength. I realized that I didn't need their approval, didn't need to play their twisted games. I had my dignity, my integrity, and a newfound clarity about the kind of people I wanted in my life. The ordeal had been painful, but it had also been transformative, stripping away the illusions I'd once clung to and revealing the true character of the people around me. Rachel and Josh faded into the background, ghosts of a life I'd left behind. They tried to tear me down, but in the end, they'd only succeeded in destroying themselves. As for me, I was free to rebuild, free to move on, and free to finally live my life on my own terms. After posting my response, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, I felt like I had control over my own story. Rachel and Josh's attempts to paint me as the villain had backfired spectacularly, and the truth was out for everyone to see. In the following days, I received a steady stream of support from friends, acquaintances, and even complete strangers who had seen the posts. The messages were overwhelmingly positive, filled with words of encouragement and admiration for standing up to the manipulation. I hadn't anticipated the sheer volume of people who could relate to my situation, who had experienced similar betrayals and had struggled to reclaim their own narratives. It was strange but comforting to feel connected to so many others who had faced down deceit and come out stronger. Then, one evening, I got an unexpected message from a name I hadn't seen in years. Josh's older brother, Alan. Alan and I had been close back in the day, back when Josh and I first became friends. He was the kind of person who was dependable, straightforward, and honest, a stark contrast to his brother. We'd lost touch over the years, but seeing his name in my inbox filled me with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. When I opened the message, I found a simple question. "Do you want to meet up for coffee? I think we need to talk." I hesitated, uncertain of his intentions, but something in his tone made me trust him. He'd always been a straight shooter, and I knew he wouldn't reach out unless it was important. I agreed, and we arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in a part of town that wasn't likely to draw attention. When I walked into the cafe, Alan was already there, sitting by the window. He stood up when he saw me, offering a warm smile that felt reassuring. We exchanged brief pleasantries before diving into the topic that had brought us together. "I saw what you posted," he began, his expression serious. I have to admit, I wasn't surprised. I've known for a long time that Josh, well, let's just say he has a knack for finding ways to use people. But I didn't realize he'd taken it this far. Alan went on to tell me things that filled in even more pieces of the puzzle. He explained how Josh had a pattern, even within their own family. He borrowed money from relatives, promising to pay them back, and then disappearing when it came time to make good on his word. He had a history of charm and manipulation that stretched back to his teenage years, long before he and I had ever crossed paths. According to Alan, I was just one in a long line of people who had been burned by Josh's self-serving schemes. "He's tried to pull me into his messes more times than I can count," Alan said, shaking his head. "And honestly, it's exhausting. But I've distanced myself from him. I can't keep making excuses for him. He needs to face the consequences of his actions." As he spoke, I felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger because I'd allowed myself to be deceived by Josh's false persona, but relief because I finally understood the full scope of what had happened. It wasn't just about me or Rachel. It was a part of a long-standing pattern, a well-rehearsed act that Josh had perfected over the years. I'd simply been the latest casualty. Alan looked at me, his expression earnest. "I wanted to tell you something else too. You know, Rachel's parents reached out to me. They're devastated, not just by what she did to you, but by the way Josh manipulated their daughter. They're talking about taking legal action. Apparently, he convinced her to sign some documents that basically handed over a significant portion of her trust fund. They're planning to fight it, and they asked if you'd be willing to share any information you have." The idea of teaming up with Rachel's family felt strange, even a little ironic. But as I thought about it, I realized that it made sense. If they were willing to hold Josh accountable, it could put an end to his manipulative tactics once and for all. I agreed to help in any way I could, and Alan promised to connect me with their lawyer. It felt like the right move, a way to ensure that Josh couldn't hurt anyone else the way he'd hurt me. Over the next few weeks, I met with Rachel's family's attorney, sharing everything I knew. I handed over copies of the dossier I'd compiled, laying out Josh's history of manipulation and deceit. The attorney was thorough, determined to build a case that would leave Josh with no escape. I found a strange sense of purpose in the process, a feeling that I was finally able to turn the tables on someone who had caused so much pain. During this time, Rachel reached out to me multiple times. She left voicemails, sent emails, even showed up at my apartment once. Her messages ranged from angry to desperate, accusing me of trying to ruin her life, then shifting to pleas for forgiveness, begging me to understand that she'd been caught up in something she couldn't control. But I had nothing left to say to her. I ignored her attempts to communicate, focusing instead on the legal battle that lay ahead. In the end, the lawsuit was successful. With the evidence we gathered, the court found that Josh had indeed manipulated Rachel into signing over her assets under false pretenses. He was ordered to pay restitution, and Rachel's family gained a sense of closure, even if it came at a high cost. As for me, I walked away from the ordeal with a newfound sense of resilience. I'd been through hell, but I'd come out stronger, wiser, and more determined to live life on my own terms. I wasn't the same person I'd been when this all began, and I was grateful for that. I'd learned to trust my instincts, to recognize toxic people for who they were, and to surround myself with friends who truly had my back. In the months that followed, I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and focused on building a life that felt authentic and fulfilling. Rachel and Josh became little more than distant memories, a part of my past that I'd left behind. They no longer had power over me, no longer haunted my thoughts or tainted my future. I looked forward to each day with a renewed sense of purpose, grateful for the lessons I'd learned and the strength I'd gained. The pain and betrayal had been brutal, but it had also been transformative. I knew that I was finally free to live, to love, and to embrace the future with open arms. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all.